Well, great. For all of those of you that are continuing to come in, we appreciate you joining our session today. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for attending the session today on a major step in finalizing CMMC requirements. I know a lot of us have been kind of sitting, waiting, anticipating when and if this is all going to happen, and we're going to discuss a pretty major milestone that transpired last month that indicates and shows that this particular initiative is accelerating and is in the, I would say the final steps of getting finalized. And so what does that mean for your organization? If you are a supplier or a provider to this or considering being one? And what do you need to do to prepare if you have not done so already or are just in those throes today? So my name is Tom Leahy. I am the Senior Vice President of Sales and Business Development with SureShield. SureShield is a technology provider focused in the risk, compliance, and security areas. We work across all verticals. I've been particularly in the field of compliance and risk for close to 30 years. I have our CTO, Chandi Bilagu, who is also on the presentation with me, who will help answer questions that you may have as we talk about these latest developments, and then also around how perhaps companies like ours can assist you or providers that may be working with you to help assure that you meet the requirements and are ready for this initiative. So we'll talk very briefly about the current compliance requirements. If you are a supplier considering being a supplier, you've probably heard the word CMMC and NIST ad nauseum, so we won't cover a ton of that outside of basically what the impact of that has on anyone that's supplying the defense industrial base. What the submission means, what's happened, and then kind of a bit of a timeline of what to expect given this latest development, what the impact of that has in terms of the overall process, both from a marketplace provider perspective and then, of course, from the suppliers, and what the suppliers, those that are serving the DIB, what the requirements you currently have are and what you're going to need to be ready to do. And then, as we mentioned in the invite to the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about leveraging technology that can help automate the compliance activities to some degree, leveraging, you could call it AI, you could call it technology that actually can help identify areas of compliance gaps that don't necessarily have to be manually entered. And we'll speak about how solutions from SureShield can provide that to you or help you in that initiative. We'll provide a quick product demo, and then we'll answer any questions. We will take a couple of polls to get a sense from the audience in terms of where you are in this process. And then also for those of you that are interested in testing solutions from SureShield to help you in this, we will make that offer to you as well. So again, not going to touch a lot on this. If you are a supplier, you know that some of the compliance issues today, any provider that's working with the DOD is required today to complete a NIST 800-171 assessment. They are to submit those scores to the Supplier Performance Risk System, the SPRS, and included in that are not just the risk, the assessment score, but a system security plan and a plan of action and milestone report. Plan of action and milestone report is basically if you are not compliant with, or you are in the process of trying to be compliant with certain requirements or controls, what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and when do you expect to have that implemented. Now, in the case of CMMC, we already know that there are going to be certain controls that they are not going to allow your organization to put on a plan of action and milestone report. So they're basically meaning there's controls that you're just going to have in place if you even want to play in the game and have an opportunity to bid on contracts. There will be some that they will allow, but there's going to be some very definitive timelines as to when you're going to have to get those implemented. So I would say the ratchets are coming down tighter in terms of this process for obvious reasons. There just continues to be even a highly integrated or a high, more hostile nations that are coming after us and trying to hack into our systems and steal our data and, obviously impacting the security of our nation. And it's proliferating. It's not going to get better. It's going to continue to get worse. And the best way to do that is to put processes in place that can help provide a defense against that. Think of ourselves as almost part of the defense system to prevent these things from happening. And they will be moving, as will be shown in the next slide, in terms of those milestones. We're going to be moving from a self-attestation process to the CMMC audit, particularly any of you that are handling what's deemed to be COI data, sensitive information. You can almost assure that you're going to have to go through an audit, or you're going to go through a more stringent process, having a third party, review and make sure that you have all of the controls and all the information in place to meet these NIST requirements. Again, NIST 800-171 is the foundation of this. And as many of you also know, they are even revising, they're coming out with I believe the version 3 of the 800-171 requirements. So on top of having to have this in place, you're going to need to also be prepared to understand what some of the new nuances are going to be of that process. And we'll talk to you about how SureShield can help you with that, because we're staying on top of these changes and we are doing what we call crosswalks to all of them. So whatever you have now with a SureShield solution, you can be assured that it's going to be able to translate into anything that comes next. And as I said, they are moving from a self-attestation to a audit process. So how do we know that this is kind of accelerating? Well, back last month, at the end of the month, the DME sent its CMMC framework to the OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. What does that mean? It's just basically there are, as we know, step processes to take things from a program to a rule and to a rule being implemented. And so right now, we've had that submission to the OMB that will then probably be reviewed over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and consider that time frame is very short. It will then be sent to the Federal Register for review, for comments, and then they will implement that rule. So it's moving forward. The submissions, it's very, very, very rare that once a submission goes to the OMB that anything gets backed off at that point. So you can be relatively highly certain that the actions related to this continue to come. And there's been a ton of public comments, both in the Congress, in the Senate hearing committees with the DOD, that they're serious about implementing CMMC. So it's not going to happen. I think that they've done a good job of rolling back from the 1 to the 2 to just understand what impacts this can be and sensitivities to the suppliers, because they do want their suppliers to continue to be, work within the defense industrial base supply chain, but they're also expecting you as a provider to have the proper security controls in place to limit or minimize the risk of bad things happening. So what does that mean, again, for you? If you look at historical data, and this is coming from some experts, if any of you attended the last Cyber AB town hall meeting, they had some experts on that were talking about basically what the average times are from something that goes to the OMB to a final rule. And that can be anywhere from 13 to 15 months, give or take 5 to 10%. So that could be shorter, it could be longer. But once it's in that phase, unless something very, very strange happens, it is going to continue to move through this process. And what does that mean for you if you're a provider? If you're waiting for this rule to get finalized, you're already behind the 8 ball, because you're going to have to line up organizations to do your certifications if you're handling COI data. Not having those things in place are going to prevent you from being able to bid on contracts, new contracts that will have these requirements in them. And you're going to, if you're not beginning that process now, 13 to 15 months will go by very, very quickly. And it will put you behind the 8 ball if you don't have the types of things in place you're going to need to have. So for instance, if you indeed are going to go through an audit, those auditors are going to be asking for information from you. They're going to be asking for evidence of where you are at today in meeting these controls, and not just, are you saying you're compliant or non-compliant or not? They're going to want to see supporting evidence as to why you can answer something like that positive. So it's important today, if you haven't begun this, or even if you have, to be going back in and reviewing where you're standing on the 800-171 process and lining up information so that ideally, if you want to be ahead of this, you can actually start lining up your C3PAOs to get prepared to come in and do your audit. So you'll need to do an audit against the CMMC and NIST 800 frameworks, obviously. And again, as I mentioned, we can assist you with that because we can provide you tools that will crosswalk all the data. One of the critical components of this that if you are handling all of your internal IT yourself, you should make sure, if you're not an IT expert, that you're talking with your IT folks, or if you're leveraging outside organizations, you're going to need to make sure that you're doing what they call regular ongoing vulnerability scans to identify and remediate any cybersecurity gaps. Basically doing an audit or a scan of the assets, both internally and externally within your environment, to identify where you may have vulnerabilities that could put your organization or put the supply chain at risk, and then have remediation processes for that. And that is actually a set of controls in the NIST 800-171 requirements. So you're going to have to demonstrate that you're doing that. You'll have to show the remediation activities and the proof and documentation of that, which includes the POAM, the SSP, and the assessment score. You'll need to have, as part of this, defined policies and procedures related to those, and being able to show where you are on each one of those controls as it relates to the policies. You're going to need to be able to show how you're protecting your COI data. And you may need to start employing, if you feel that you need outside help, employing what they call these registered provider organizations, the RPOs, that have been basically deemed by the Cyber ASB as one that can help an organization prepare and be ready to get NIST 800-171 or CMMC compliant. And actually with SureShield, we work with a lot of RPOs. So if you need things beyond just that of working internally, we have providers that can certainly help you get to where you need to go. And before we go into that, let's just take a very quick poll in terms of, with the audience that's here today, where you're at as it relates to your NIST 800-171 assessment process. I'm just going to go ahead and launch that poll. So asking for the audience here, have you submitted a score to the SPRS? Yes or no, or you may not be sure. If you have, do you have tools that are going to allow you to easily update this? Because this is not a point-in-time process. If you do an assessment and do an evaluation of that, you're obviously going to find areas where you may or may not, where you have gaps or the likes. And as such, you're going to need to close those gaps. You're going to need to do that reassessment score. So if you don't have good tools that can help you kind of automate that process in a more easy manner, it's going to actually add a redundancy and a lot of work for you. Again, many of you may have good tools in place through Microsoft or through Google that are helping you meet some of these controls. But again, you're going to need to have a means to aggregate all of that information to roll this up into a score and to submit those scores. So just looking at the poll, it looks like about 40% of you have done this, about 40% haven't, and there's about a 10% that are not sure. And in most cases, about half of you are indicating that you think that you have tools that you can easily update. So that's good for those of you that have those types of things in place. So let me speak a little bit about how we work with providers like you, both with organizations and MSPs that service your organizations and or working with us directly. So we provide solutions that will help you do the most important thing starting out, which is basically the assessment process. We have a tool that we're going to show you that can help you actually walk through your assessment, identify where you may have gaps, provide you with documented policies that you can modify, edit, and update to make sure that you have those in place and validate that you have those in place for you, which will be something, again, that an auditor will be looking at. And then we have tools that can help you provide the gap solutions or remediations. We also have automation tools that can actually go into your network and identify areas of compliance, what I would call compliance automation. So for instance, one of the controls indicates the need to have unique IDs and passwords, and that everybody that's working with your organization has those. So we can, automatically audit things like your Active Directory to determine if you have issues like that in place or not, and automatically help determine whether something is compliant or not. And keep in mind that if you use that on a regular basis, we can also give you times that control, for instance, could have been impacted. It may have been in place today, and a month later, it's not in place anymore. And those are the kind of things that we help provide. We have solutions that will help do and simplify that process of doing your vulnerability scans. Against those compliance audit frameworks, we'll identify the vulnerabilities, we'll stratify them from a risk perspective, we'll give information on how to get the biggest bang for your buck, and we'll give you information on actually how to do those remediations. And again, if you're working with a service provider, you should be asking them if they have these in place. If not, we could even help them and you with that process as well. And again, from a operational standpoint, with our solutions, we help bring together all of the required documentation that you need to have today and will need to have in the future to meet both the NIST 800-171 requirements as well as most likely the CMMC requirements. And those include the plan of action and milestone report. That comes off of if you have a control that you know you're going to need to work on, you can identify what you're going to do, when you're going to have that in place. And that is basically what the requirement is of a plan of action and milestone. What's the control? What's the area that we're having to fix? And when are we going to fix it, and how are we going to fix it? We'll roll all that into your plan of action and milestone report. It also will help automate what they call the system security plan, which basically gives an overview of your network systems at large, and then incorporates the controls, the assessment controls that come from the NIST 800-171 or the CMMC related assessment. We help automate all that process for you. So I'm going to just give you a very brief overview of that solution, and then we will get into some of the questions that any of you may have in terms of what should you be expecting and how, if you have questions on how you're going to get yourself there, we will get into that as well. So I'm coming in right now to a product solution we call ComplyShield. And ComplyShield actually is a comprehensive, complete compliance security compliance automation solution. While we are focused today on addressing things like NIST and CMMC, what our solution provides are templates or audit components across any type of security framework you may have to deal with. Many of you may be servicing the healthcare industry, so you have HIPAA-related requirements you need to meet. Some of you may be having SOC requirements. We have over 35 different control frameworks that are built into the solution. And one of the beauties of what we have as well is what we call a crosswalk process. So a lot of controls or practices when it comes to these different domains of compliance requirements are very similar in nature. In the case of CMMC and NIST, we know that there's one-to-one relationships. There's really no difference between the CMMC controls and the NIST controls outside of numbering. And then, of course, if you are a company that would be deemed at a level 1, there are only 17 practices that you're going to need to be compliant with. And if you are in that process, you would be an organization that will be able to do a self-attestation. Keeping in mind there's going to be a lot more stringency and a lot more liability on that self-assessment, meaning if you are attesting to something and it indeed is not there, you could face things as it relates to the False Claims Act, and those are not fun things to have to deal with. So very important that you have, even if you're at that level, you have answers to those controls, and you have the supporting evidence to show you those answers to those controls. So in our case, what it's showing me, I've gone in and I'm looking at this from a CMMC perspective right now. So it's showing me that I have about 107 controls that I have to address. It's telling me those that I know right now are non-compliant, those that I need to answer. This particular example, they have not gotten through a lot, but they may have started by looking at their policies and procedures. So it's showing me the policies and procedures, those that still need to be reviewed. Evidence worksheets are documents, as I mentioned, that can be, or evidence that can be pulled directly from things like compliance scans to populate information that will provide you supporting evidence for a particular control. So you can see in the example of this access control, it's telling me that the data that was pulled from this was actually from what we call this compliance scanner. We ran a compliance scan, and it is looking at information as it relates to this particular security practice, and it's identifying an impact, basically saying that this control may have been impacted because there's something that's out of line and it now may no longer be compliant. But as it relates to just going in and answering any particular control or question, it's as simple as clicking into that control. You'll note that we provide, and this is one reason that a lot of folks like to start with us, is that we provide a ton of information, basically knowledge, that helps you understand what you need to do in order to meet these compliance requirements to answer these questions. So we provide supplemental guidance, we provide implementation guidance, we provide status evidence and responses, we provide questions that you can be questions you can be asking in order to help meet those requirements. So really guidance to help get you to how to answer that particular control. And then as you can see, when you come in, there's areas over here to provide your evidence, to answer your questions, to input any comments that you may have. Again, this is a continuous system, so anytime that you've added comments, our system will continuously provide an audit of all those. It will allow you to upload documentation or evidence if need be. And if there is a requirement for you to do any kind of assessment or to do any kind of plan of action on this, to indicate what that action is and when you intend to have that in place. So as you go along answering questions, again, within here, you have the ability to assign different questions to different people. So if you, for instance, have a group, a particular group of folks that you want to assign access control questions to, or training related questions to, there's workflow that's built in to assign that work out and then to roll that up and collate that all for you. And it will also give you information on any of those requests that have gone out so that you can track those and bring those to completion. I'm going to touch briefly again on just going into the policies and procedures. So you can see here under CMMC, there are actually 14, I believe, different policies that relate to that. We provide you those to review. And then once you've done a review of those, to basically make sure that they apply to you. Now, with our policies, you can modify the ones that we have, or you can upload the ones that you may already have in place. And the beauty of that as well is we tie those and map those to all the controls that relate to them. So in the case of the access control policy, there's actually 22 different practices that are related to that. And since I have already gone in and reviewed and kind of activated this policy, I'm now able to begin to do a review against how I'm doing on those controls from a compliance standpoint. So you can see in this particular review that I have, there's 22 different applicable practices. I've got one of them that's compliant. I have 2 that aren't, and I still have 19 to answer. If I were to click on these, it would take me directly to those particular controls. If I want to just review the policy, you'll see it will bring it up for me. It'll allow me to go in and take a look at this, to edit, and it also provides the process of, if I saw everything and said that everything was good for me, then I have the ability to go and save and validate. And then that basically is indicating and giving an extra layer of assurance that I have actually not just brought this in, but I've taken a review of this particular policy. And then that would allow me, of course, again, to begin to answer and to modify and map the controls that relate to that policy as well. So I'm just going to exit out of here and get back into the control areas, and just note again with the solution. So unlike other products on the market as well, you're not required to answer every question in order to be able to get a sense of where you stand from a compliance standpoint. So there are, as I mentioned, a variety of different management and compliance related reports that are available, both from a compliance summary perspective that allows you to go in and look at various types of executive summary reports, reports on compliance, show you the gaps that you have, where you need to maybe implement changes to get them in compliance. You can share these reports with other people. You can schedule the reports to go out to people on a periodic basis. And for purposes of the discussion today, as it relates specifically to the CMMC and NIST requirements, you can see within here, we have all the automated system security plan reports, the plan of action and milestone reports, and the report on your NIST assessment score. Very easy for you to just decide at what level it is you want to run that at. You pick that particular control framework and you go ahead and run the report. Since we don't have a lot of data on this particular organization, you're going to see when I run that report, I've got a pretty significant negative score. This is not something that you would want to be submitting to the SPRS. But as you continuously go in and update this information, you will note that then the score will dynamically change. So many of you are probably familiar, there are certain controls that have a higher negative score, meaning that if they're not in place, you're going to get dinged higher on those. But as you put them in place, your scores will begin to change from, hopefully from a negative into a positive area. And most organizations, if you have begun this process to some degree, we can even take your existing data. If you're one of the folks that answered, hey, I've got a tool, but I really can't update it, we can take in existing information, populate it into our program, and then have you have a baseline to run at from there and a continuous solution for doing that. And we provide this at a very, very, cost-effective process as well. I'm going to touch just very briefly on our security scanning solution as well. So our system very quickly allows you to run what we call scans. So you can schedule those scans either if you're running them yourselves. We leverage what we call the gold standard in scanning, an enterprise-related tool from an organization called Rapid7. It's kind of the market leader in scanning and vulnerability processes. We've taken that enterprise, what I would call utility and functionality, but we've packaged it and we've deployed it in a way that's very simple to implement, very simple for people to digest, and very pointed in how it helps you get to where you can very quickly address the vulnerabilities you may have. It also can be very easily deployed, and that comes through just basically a console that you set up that allows you to schedule your scans, to run your scans, to do them on any area that you want at any point in time. Gives a lot of flexibility in terms of running that process. And again, as it relates to the NIST controls, the recommendation is you need to have this in place. And really, the more gold standard recommendation is that you should be running this at least on a monthly basis and taking actions to remediate your vulnerabilities. So what our system will do is it will identify those vulnerabilities. It will provide risk ratings in terms of what the degree of risk is with those. And most importantly, it will provide remediation guidance. And as you run remediations, it will come back and tell you the effectiveness of that. So you may have run something that you think was going to solve the problem, and it didn't. And if it did not, it will show you what that was and why that was the case. Again, it gives you the opportunity to run a variety of different reports that can help you or help management better understand how to focus in on what might be the most critical areas and stratify them so that you can obviously get the best use of your resources and maximize your resources for the best output to reduce your risk at the grandest of scales. So with that, again, given that what we had to update is really, many of you are obviously already familiar with this process. I think it's safe to say that it is clear that that now with this latest action by the Department of Defense and doing that submission, that this is getting accelerated. You should probably also be noticing if there are any new solicitations. We've heard a lot of people that have been telling us that the NIST 800-171 requirements in the submission to the SPRS score are requirements that are coming into contracts. So if you haven't done that, it would behoove you to start getting that process in place, seeing where you are, and beginning that process of closing some gaps and getting a score, a poem, and an SPRS submitted, because it's going, even in this interim time frame, it's going to be a requirement for you. So clearly, all indications are that this is moving. It's moving rather exponentially now, that it's very likely by the beginning of not next year, but in the course of next year, you're going to start to see these requirements coming into solicitations. And again, if you're not lining up people now and getting an understanding of what might be required for this audit, you're going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball. And our goal is to help provide you solutions that can help begin that process for you if you need it, or make it a much more efficient process for you if not. So with that, let's go ahead and open up for questions. Just going to launch a quick poll for those of you who are on here. We oftentimes have a lot of folks that take us up on wanting to test out this, so we make this solution available to you to begin to test at no obligation. And should you want to continue to use it in the future, there is a nominal fee. We allow you to do it on a monthly basis to allow you to help modify and use the solution to help close those gaps and give you a continuous tool that's going to get you ready for this particular process as well. So with that, I will keep the poll open. I see a number of you responding that you would like to test these out. For those of you that are indicating the desire to trial, we'll be contacting you to set up time to get your trial started. Please note that when you receive the follow-up email that will contain the content from this presentation as well as the webinar, there will be a link that will allow you to go ahead and schedule a time convenient for you to get that trial set up. For those who you have indicated no, or maybe later, we will obviously continue to stay in touch with you as things change and be ready to assist you should you want that assistance. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and keep the poll open until we close the session out and see if there are any questions. Please go to the Q&A area of Zoom to answer any or to open any of the questions you may have. Right now, I don't see any questions in here, so we'll just give folks a minute or two. I do see that there's some people that are on the chat and perhaps some of the questions. Chandi, I'm not looking at the chat right now, so I don't know if there were some questions that may have been asked in the chat.
I have answered the questions on the chat, Tom. So okay. Whatever has been raised, yeah.
Super, super. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to keep things open here for a minute or so. I don't see any questions outside of I can help. People will typically ask, what are the costs of this? Okay, so one of the questions is, will it be required to be simply compliant or require certifications? Part of our business is government contracts. So Chandi, I'll answer that, but if you could go ahead and type the answer to this as well. If you are working with the Department of Defense as a contractor or subcontractor, you will have to have in the future a certification. As I mentioned, this new CMMC process is coming into play, and it's going to have either a third-party audit come in and basically do a seal of approval to indicate that you are meeting whatever the basis of requirements are that the rule will establish, but there will be a basis of readiness that you will have to have in place in order to get that certification. If you are at what they call level 1, you will do a self-attestation against 17 what they call basic cyber hygiene controls. You will need to be compliant. When folks say simply being compliant is different than demonstrating that you're compliant. So if you're saying that you're compliant, you're going to need to provide evidence to support that. Today, you do need to submit, the current requirement up until a little while ago is to just do the assessment and submit the information. They were not putting any kind of basis on that score. However, since they've been doing this and reviewing those, they're noticing, one, that oftentimes those scores are inadequate I'll just say people may have misinterpreted a control and marked it compliant. And so when they've gone back and redid these, they found that they were less compliant than they thought. And you can be certain given the types of activities that have been taking place most recently, they're going to put some more, most likely minimums even today on a level that they're going to expect you from a score perspective to be at in order to participate, or even if it's not to participate, very likely that they're going to be looking at the competition and looking at that information and determining, you know, do I want to work with a provider that's got a less of a good security posture? Probably that will come into an evaluation as they evaluate agreements as well. But from a costing standpoint, we cost on our compliance solution based upon the frameworks that you're activating. We do consider NIST 800 and CMMC to be the same, so we consider that one framework. It's a very cost-effective, can be purchased on a monthly, or it can be paid for on a monthly basis. Our scanning solutions are based upon the assets that are scanned within your environment, not the total assets you have in your environment, but those that you've opted to scan. And if you want more specific information, you know, you can reach out to me, and based upon kind of the dynamics of your organization, I can give you, or we, you know, members of our team can give you more very specific costing. But again, our clients are finding this to be very cost effective to meet the requirements that they have to meet. So I don't see any more questions. Well, let's hold on. I see another one that's coming in here now. Yes, so one of the questions, I believe, from Holger. Yes, Holger, please reach out to us. We can help you in both processes. And we work with a lot of MSPs that have these types of services they need to provide to their clients for other purposes as well, whether it's NIST, whether you're looking to get yourself NIST certified, we can help you with that as well. So if you didn't answer yes to a follow-up, we'll just make a note to follow up with you. Our organization can help you with that process as well. We work with a lot of companies like yours in that process. And many of our RPOs that are working with us have used our solution to do their own certification. And then they are, of course, rolling that out to the clients that they're working with as well. We are almost, I'm going to give it just till the 45 minutes of the hour. We'll buy you back 15 minutes of time if there are no other questions. But I'm just going to hold things open here for another minute or so for anyone to ask any additional questions. Again, keep an eye out for those of you who are participating here for copies of the content to come out to you, both the webinar presentation as well as the content of this. And for those of you who have indicated yes, please keep an eye out for that email and pick a time that works for you. If we don't hear back from you, you know, in the next day or two, we'll have someone reach out to get that set up for you as well. But we're, of course, anxious to help you as expeditiously as we can. So again, thank you for your time. You know, if you want more information, you can always go to info@sure-shield.com. That will provide you a lot of information on solutions that we provide and how we provide, you know, the products we do to help people stay compliant and keep their organizations cyber safe. So with that, I will go ahead and end the presentation. Thank you all for your participation today, and we look forward to working with you here in the near future. Thanks again. Bye now.